Hi, I'm Wine Guy Ty. Welcome to the Barrel Room. Today, my guest is Richard de Silva. He's the proprietor, along with wife Twylla, in Vigneron at his eponymous Vineyards and Winery, de Silva Winery. And it's the upper bench area of Naramata in sunny Okanagan, BC. Hi, Richard.
Hello, Ty. How are you?
Good. Before we get into it, I need to thank listeners and subscribers. It's been a minute since I've been able to upload a new episode. So I say a big thanks for your continued support and your patience, and it's good to be back. And I also want to make mention of my last interview with Felipe Ferreira from Quinta da Foz in Douro, Portugal. He has over 30 autochthonous indigenous varietals planted and over a decade at the helm there. So grapes that you're probably familiar with, Richard, Torriga Nacional, Torriga Franca, Tintorores, with traditional foot stomping in the Lagares. So if that sounds of interest to you, head on over and have a listen. So you just got back from Apex. You were in Apex this morning. What was that all about?
Just doing some non-wine related activities. So we're just up, my wife and I, as a kind of one of our sole sports. Skiing is our first, cycling is second, and trail running is pretty close to cycling. So we were up there today doing some trail running. So doing some training. Yeah, so it was a fantastic way to go do a Sunday morning, and it was fantastic up at the local ski hill.
How long does it take to get up there?
Well, we're very fortunate here that's the ski hill for us is like under 30-minute drive from here. So it's such one of the great benefits of living where we live. Everything here is 30 minutes away, so including skiing. So it was a fantastic drive up there. It was beautiful up there today, and sunny and cool, the kind of alpine feel to it, and it's just so fortunate to be here.
Yeah, I've never been up there myself. I've been to some of the local mountains, but not Apex. But that sounds fun.
I always say it's the little brother of Red Mountain. If you've ever skied Red Mountain in Rossland, it certainly has a higher proportion of black runs to blue.
Yeah.
And but it's a fantastic small family hill. It'll never kind of blow up like some of the other bigger resorts. It's always going to be kind of a family vibe, and we really love that. That's what we really enjoy about it. It's local and small town vibe up there. So
cool. Proprietor and vigneron is what your card says, and that's interesting. Vigneron, the French term for grape grower rather than winemaker. Why is that distinction important to you?
I think it encompasses, there's typically, I think, I would say people see it as the winemaking process as two things: viticulture and vineyard or grape growing, farming, and then winemaking as two separate disciplines. And certainly they do interact with each other and there's crossover, but most places let's say in BC, for example, those are distinct different roles. Smaller producers like myself, and Vigneron is not, I wouldn't think it's unique to just myself, though I distinctly want to use that name because I'm not just a winemaker, not that I'm against that, but I think to me, it's not as important as really being connected to the land, which is the grape growing and being a farmer first. And so the Vigneron was the term that I've always kind of resonated with and describes, I think, probably more holistically what I do here, which is really spend probably 3/4 of my energy on the vineyard and the other 25% on the winemaking. Mm-hmm. Even though winemaking, most people think that's important, I actually think it is a 75-25 split. It's far more important to me to spend that energy drilling into my vineyards and making sure what's going on in the field, because it starts there.
A passion for crafting wines of place is your motto here. So Naramata, but you're Portuguese Canadian. How is this place different than other areas? I mean, you've got vineyards kind of all across here and maybe some down in Oliver. Let's start there too. Your family immigrated here, in 1955? Right?
Yeah. So my family moved here in 1955 from the archipelago islands of the Azores from Portugal. So right in the middle of between Lisbon and Miami kind of idea. Yeah. It's a group of islands, volcanic islands. They were one of the first 6 couples here in that era. And eventually, by the early 1970s, I had 12 aunts and uncles and 4 grandparents all living in Oliver. And so they initially did move to Naramata, but the family moved all to Oliver, a couple to Osoyoos as well. And consequently, that's where I was born, is in Oliver. So, yeah, deep roots here, I think.
So a history of farming in the South Okanagan. That connection obviously is really strong. Where, when, or at what point did you take an interest in wine and decide to become a vigneron in your own right?
I think we take it for granted. I mean, when you grow up as those of your listeners that are Latin descent, if they're French or Spanish, Portuguese or Italian background, or even Greek, wine is really intrinsically part of everyday life. So it was never kind of weird. It was never this kind of thing that was on a pedestal. So it was just always there. You always had grapes, and you always made wine in the season. And in the summertime, you'd make other kind of alcoholic beverages and spirits. And it was just kind of there as part of religion, part of.
So when you're growing up, you're surrounded by people doing all this stuff, and I assume at some point, you get your hands and feet dirty yourself and help out.
Yeah, that I think kicked into gear after I left high school, though, because wine in the Portuguese sense is just part of your culture, so it's not kind of revered in any way in that sense. It was being introduced by a really close friend of mine whose father was probably one of the most prolific wine collectors in the Pacific Northwest, where that switched gears for me. I was very fortunate at a very young age, and we're talking about like 19, 20, to be introduced to some of the most iconic wines of the world, Haut-Brion, Lafite, Rothschild, and his dad would have these dinners.
First growths.
First growths. They were personal friends of the Dami family, and really familiar with the California wine scene, for example, in the early 80s when those guys were just hitting their stride. So, icons like Ridge and a number of other icons that became what we know today as these.
It's amazing to be able to cut your teeth on those legendary wines, especially in the New World here. Ridge, is just top story and wines.
Yeah, it was really bizarre. I never understood until much later how today we're going to sit down and do a 5-year vertical of Mouton Rothschild or Chateau Lafite or Chateau Aquim or something like that. It was just kind of like, oh, okay, cool. Like it was just kind of like
sounds good,
sounds all right.
But the context happens afterwards. That's funny because I was in Bordeaux about 30 years ago, and I only had time to visit one winery. And I looked which was the closest to the city where my partner at the time, myself, were staying, right in the heart of the city, and it was Chateaubriand.
Yeah.
So of course I called up the winery, and it might have been a weekend or a Sunday like today, and they said, yeah, well, come on by, and so we go, and the grand gates, and come in, and the whole red carpet treatment, and I still remember that now. And going in the cellar and actually tapping some barrels and so on. But getting into the wine business a dozen years ago, I think back at that moment, if I had known then what I know now. But maybe I would have been more measured in my experience of that, and it wouldn't have been as free. But.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, like, for me, it was obviously what that went from, like, say, homemade wines, let's say, growing up in your culture, to my version of a good wine was those like Silver Oaks when they first were coming out, or Chateau Montelena and these kind of guys from California, and it was like, oh, okay, well, this is what a good wine, and not realizing obviously that these would come down later on as being some of the most iconic wines of the New World and the Old World. But it certainly set the bar as far as my palate went, and my friend had started up an agency representing boutique wines in BC, and it was interesting because I really got to see the good, the bad, the ugly of wine, like amazing examples from both our own region, from around the world, and that really kind of zoned in, realizing that I had fairly decent palate, which is important,
of course,
and then realizing that, oh, hey, wait a minute, I have this background of growing, and though we did grapes, a portion of our holdings were also in grapes, majority was in soft fruits, and what most people don't understand is that when I mean soft fruits, we're talking cherries and peaches and those kind of things. Yeah. Those those fruits are far more challenging to grow than grapes are. Their inputs, their manicuring is at a whole other level compared to wine. I mean, think about a peach or a cherry. It's basically not only its taste, but it's on its visual appearance. So your tending of a peach tree that is very susceptible to pests and disease and all that kind of stuff, your final value of that product is based on its visual quality as well as its taste. And
sure.
Whereas grapes...
That's a good point of differentiation, actually, when you think about it. Like, I know where you're going with this, with grapes, because they need to struggle, really. It's almost the opposite of, that kind of irrigation and the fruit needing to be finessed for its visual appeal, for its primary kind of
the grapes
desirability.
Grapes, you end up crushing them and stomping on them and making fruit. You're not measuring them by how good they look.
Yeah.
It's going to be the result in wine someday. I mean, there is obviously good-looking fruit will make better wine, but I mean, there's not a direct, value on the appearance of it. It's more of like just the conditions the grape is growing and it's at harvest. But yeah, I think that work ethic in soft fruits was far more intense than in grape growing. And it's certainly set me the foundation of inputs, farming from a technical perspective.
Yeah.
That set the foundation to go, okay, I like wine. I didn't really want to go back to soft fruit. I mean, I grew up doing that, and it was just like, this is brutal. But grapes, this is like, it's not as hard. and I can combine these two passions kind of thing with the wine and the fruit, and having really in-depth knowledge of the fruit side of things. I had to, obviously had to go to another step to learn the winemaking part of it. But I found that far easier, in my opinion, to me, because I'm self-taught, than the growing side of things.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and maybe that's just me personally, but yeah, it was an interesting transition to go from that realization that we can do these wines here. Like, I was tasting wines, some of the initial small boutique wineries out of BC that were comparing to some of the iconic wines I was tasting from elsewhere. I'm like, hey, wait a minute, like maybe we can do some of this here. So yeah, that's kind of where it started.
You're a terroir-driven vigneron-winemaker and put clear emphasis on sites and vineyards of which your family, as you've just sort of described, several scattered all around the region. You put latitude and longitude on your bottles to indicate specific provenance. What have you learned about certain sites, and what have you discovered? You've been at this for decades now.
I mean, in context of where we are today, I think it's become even more important. I think, place is fundamentally one of the 4 core values that I give to wine. History is very important. I think it frames context. Place is the other thing, and that's kind of what differentiates. There's a value given to that, and there's a certain tangibility to the final product to a certain place. And it's the one thing that no one else can copy. They can't copy my site. You can make another wine with a similar varieties or similar style, but you'll never have my wine because you don't have my dirt. And so to me, and also I think there was a deep connection to place, because I understood even back then, maybe not consciously, that at some point that was going to become important. My family lived through some very drastic changes in the BC tree fruit industry that wiped our family out, and understood that we had to protect that. And so how do you do that is by defining that place and putting walls around it. Mm-hmm. And you look at, fast forward to today, that is true. I mean, it is what keeps the wolves at bay from dumping into our background. My family got annihilated in the early 80s. Some lost their farms to the dumping of tree fruits into the BC fruit industry or market from Washington State. Mm. It was devastating. I saw that play out in my community. It was irreversible. Some of them never crawl out of that again. And so that instilled in me that there was something defining place. Why that was, I didn't know at the beginning, to how important that was going to become until much later.
Well, it's something that is established around the world, and we equate certain legendary wines with their terroir, with their provenance. But in BC, it's still a fairly nascent industry, even though we've got more than 300 wineries across British Columbia. I still find it fascinating when people are still experimenting with various varietals, grapes, and not really kind of honing in on the terroir and figuring, like, dialing it in the way that you put so much importance onto that. There's a few others that do that well, I think, but it really fascinates me.
Yeah, I think I would say though, in my extensive travels to other wine regions of the world, one of the things though, I do like the fact that I am allowed to experiment. My customer is there on this exploratory trip. There isn't like these rigid rules. And I've talked to fellow producers, colleagues of mine from the old world, that feel there is no creativity in what they do. It's been legislated by generations of laws, and all their role is to continue the tradition of that law
and carry it forward. Yeah.
And I have seen. I was in the Mosul, and it was very, very poignant and touching to me. I saw a gentleman, probably in his mid-60s, in what to most of us that love Riesling, the Mosul is like the holy grail. And we had an amazing discussion. Spoke very bad English, but we managed to speak the language. But I was talking about how I was this kaleidoscope of varieties and what we're doing. But it was just, and I didn't claim to we're still figuring it out. And to see him break down and cry and to say that we don't have that passion here. We see it from the New World, this history of Mosul Rieslings, for example. But from a producer there, they don't have that kind of that sense of pioneer or discovery and
sure.
art, and saying, hey, I want to try something, And I remember one time I just kind of interesting. I was like, wow, I really love the aromatics of the Rheingau and the mouthfeel of the Mosul. Why? It was just like I dropped a bomb in the room. I thought it never happened. But to me, I was like, that would make an amazing Riesling, because I love that nose on those wines from that region, and I love that almost effervescent type minerality that you get in Mosul Rieslings. I mean, like, that would just be like, those two combined would just be like magical.
Yeah.
And I was just, here I'm allowed to do that. I think ultimately, when I talk about terroir, is to say, hey, this is where it's coming from. It's a guarantee this is coming from here. I'm not saying that I know exactly what's going to be going here, because that's going to take time. These winter events that we just went through, for example, those show those maybe weaknesses in our armor around that kind of knowledge. But I love the creativity, and I think where BC has to evolve is, we don't want to be scatterbrained, but I think there's something to be said about being able to kind of celebrate the diversity and the good, the bad, and the ugly. It's a jury. Now, obviously, we want less bad, and so you don't want to have that going on. But I look at the only regulations that we have, the BCVQA, and taking at the inception of BC's wine industry, going from taking a European French kind of model and plopping the box into a new world wine region that had no history. I understand why, because there's no
precedent.
There's no precedence. But moving forward, I don't know. I'm just like, hey man, if you want to grow some cool hybrid or do something, does it make a tasty wine? Does a consumer like it? Does it have a story? Is it of a place?
Yeah.
I think that's cool. I don't want to be constrained and shackled to some archaic system that basically says, sorry, you can be an individual. You must follow these rules because some self-interested group at the time had some kind of say in it.
Yes. So wine law is indeed important stuff, and we have to understand the ramifications of all of that. But Naramata, obviously, that is a great perspective and point of view. We're in a place where you can have some fun and do these things compared to the old world. Yeah,
I would preface that. I think that ultimately, at the end of the day, by virtue of our industry, we're in the premium wine game. We have to. This is very small lots. These are very small acreages. Most of my blocks are 1 acre, 2 acre lots, and so at the end of the day, it behooves you to very quickly find out what can you grow that is world class. That can be that your counterparts across the world can drink that wine and go, that is a great example of ABC wine. And so even though, yeah, the Naramata bench is interesting, you can grow almost anything, that doesn't mean say you should. I mean, at the end of the day, I think we do want to focus, I think at some point, at some key varieties that shine as a very great example of what the Naramata bench can produce compared to all our colleagues elsewhere in the world. And so that is, I think, going to happen over time, because the consumer will not, if you're growing some obscure Zinfandel on a small site on the Naramata bench, you can't ripen it, the consumer is not going to be willing to pay the price for that compared to a Zinfandel from somewhere else in the world that's far better suited for that.
Well, that's a good segue for this next little bit. It is hot. It's hot today out here, sitting on this patio at the restaurant. We're going to talk about that in just a few minutes, but we're in a semi-arid area at the northern tip of the Great Basin Desert, and many people don't know, if they don't know anything about our wine country here in the Okanagan, it is a desert. Fun fact for listeners, there are more growing degree days, GDDs, here than Napa Valley, California. But there has been extreme weather events in recent years, fires, of course, 2 significant frosts that have decimated certain vineyards and actually and there weren't vintages, so we have some new things there. But specifically, how has climate and these recent events shaped what you're doing in the vineyards here?
The interesting thing about that topic for someone like myself is when you start talking about the arc of time that my family has been involved growing in the Okanagan, these events were not rare. In fact, the winter kill that we've seen the last couple of years happened cyclically all the time. And so the year after my family moved here in 1956, there was a massive winter kill, far worse than what we saw here in last year. It wiped out everything. And a lot of people don't think, for example, know that Ashcroft Spence's Bridge had actually a almost as sizable fruit growing region there as they did in the Okanagan. Oh. And in 56, and to this day, if you're driving through that region, you can still see former like shadow ghosts of those trees, like apricot trees in kind of rows that are just growing wild from the trunks that were left behind. And in 56, it annihilated everybody. Now, the Okanagan had the infrastructure to rebuild again. They didn't have the same luxury there. And then it happened again in 68 and 69 to our family, and those are growing here, not just to my family, of course. Happened to us in 78, which I remember, and I remember as a kid, a cherry tree in our front yard at our farm in Oliver, where the split in the trunk was so deep that you could put your hand inside the crack from how cold it got. And now, those that know cherry trees, it's a hardwood. And so you then look in 1985, it happened. And then again, it sort of touched a bit in 1991, but since then it's been pretty much never got there again. Mm. And so you have a whole industry here that, from a winemaking and viticulture perspective, that don't have that history of why they weren't growing vinifera prior to the 90s, right? And so climate change, however you want to frame that, has probably net benefited the Okanagan more than it has not.
Despite the events, because you would have had every 10 years, if you look at that, like 78, 85, 68, those are 10, 12-year events. Mm-hmm. You would just be getting into full production in your vineyard and you'd be redoing it again. And so I think and I'm not a proponent for climate change, that's not the discussion, but I'm saying having that advantage of a family that's farmed here for so long, this perspective there of the events that we've seen here. Now, certainly the intensity of heat and some of these other events has definitely, I don't remember often seeing temperatures in the mid 40s, for example, growing up. But yeah, I'm sure there's things that are changing what we're doing. Does it get up to mid 40s, or did it get up to mid 40s this?
No, this year was actually this year's been fairly mild. It's been actually wetter, which has been fantastic, and I hope that means it's going to be a great ski season. But the thing is that those mid 40 temperatures, though maybe familiar in Spain or in Greece and some of these other regions and certain regions of southern Italy, we just haven't faced those consecutively here in the Okanagan to the degree we have lately. But I would say that, I think we just have to, as an industry, build resilience. That means having inventory, building in proper varieties that can
more winter hardy and
they're both extremes on that side of things.
Yeah.
But funny enough, in my replant, I didn't change any of the varieties I planted. What I had there before was the same varieties I put back in, because I already had that kind of foreknowledge of that. And so I'm willing to roll that dice, because I've already known in the back of my mind that there was that risk there already, if that makes sense.
So let's talk about wines. We're talking about grapes. You have a broad variety of things that you do here. So I was looking on the website, Isabella Sparkler, Vino Branco, which is the field blend, Fumé Blanc, Sauv Blanc, I guess, Chardonnay, Viognier, Vino Tinto, the other field blend, Pinot Noir, Cab Franc, Cab Sauv, Malbec, lots of vinifera going on there. And then you've got the Legato series, which are the best barrels of a vintage, the Nobrezzo 19, some vintages of Merlot, the most widely grown red varietal up in these parts. And
used to be.
Used to be. It's changing, isn't it?
Yeah.
18, 19, and 20 Pinot Noir shards. So, and you have brought out here. We're gonna taste the two field blends, I guess. Talk about those.
Yeah, I think the thing I like about I just got this wine out of ice here, the Vino Branco. So, to me, I've always, pragmatic in the sense of when it comes to winemaking and growing. To me, it's like how, I have these different, and so if you look at if you were without context of my story and you looked at the varietals you just listed, you're saying, oh, what's going on? Why all these varieties? But I have family and colleagues and that I've been working with for decades now, that have small sites from basically Summerland to the U.S. border. And so if you are talking about wine of a place and you're working with these different little growers, that means they're going to have different varieties than what I'm going to be growing here in Naramata. And so what you see in those wines is that kaleidoscope of small little vineyards that are peppered throughout the South Okanagan and really focus on what those little sites grow best. And when it comes to the field blends, what it is it's kind of more, it's like vineyard blends, but co-fermented together.
It's a Portuguese tradition as well.
Yeah, no, it's I mean, if being in I mean, it is becoming more prevalent today, but certainly growing up, nobody really talked about varieties there. I mean, it was almost kind of, it was forced on them by the New World fascination of varietal. Portuguese are very pragmatic. They'd be like, I don't know, it grows really well over there. It's got reds, whites, they're tasty, they survive, they make good wine. And that's literally the thought process. It was it wasn't like this kind of super kind of contrived, overthought out process. They're just pragmatically.
Well, that's what Felipe was kind of conveying to me. I think he was sort of taken aback by my obsession of these Portuguese grape varietals, and he just we got all these things, and we whatever grows here, whatever grows there, but put it in the glass and see if you like it or not, and it's delicious stuff.
Yeah, I can see where some of them would be a little probably almost irritated sometimes when you talk about like that, especially older school producers, because they're like, I don't know, do you like the wine? It's kind of like, and so the impetus for this wine, or the inspiration for this wine, is basically like dry table whites that I grew up with, and it's not meant to be overcomplicated. The wine has a sense of tannin in it because it has a bit of leaf stems and this and that to go into it, just like you would in some of these older blends from the old world, and it's all co-fermented, and so you get this kind of really cool kind of rustic quality to it that's magical with food. And then the thing is, we have to
it tastes really
like I would have never
food kind of styled particularly.
I would have never grown up with wine outside the context of food. That's certainly not something that you would see other beverages, but you always see, and it wasn't planned, it would be either dry white or dry red with food. And nobody ever sat there and pontificated about the white or the wine. It was just like, oh, this is a good tasting wine, goes good with the food. And that was the extent of that. And so my inspiration for these two wines is literally that. Like, I just want to make a really great white wine that just complements almost any dish, even some red meat dishes. And having a bit of that tannin in there kind of does that. And it's not overly fruity in that sense. It has fruit, but it's more earthy in some ways, you know what I mean? And and you don't see it very much nowadays. A lot of people are really motivated to create very aromatic, tropical nose white wines. It's kind of like a very kind of in vogue. I never grew up with those kind of wines. I think in Portugal, I mean, some of the wines are almost a bit reductive sometimes in a way, and not necessarily in a negative way. Because you use the term reductive, you kind of think, oh, well, it's just this kind of more subtle fruit composition. It's just kind of more, it's more of a texture and weight versus fruit.
And then by contrast, the red.
Yeah, the Vino Tinto. Yeah, the Vino Tinto is interesting. It does have, it's a blend, and I've been really trying to not answer questions on the blend. It does have, and I have on the back, it's got some Syrah, Cab Franc, Cab Sauv, a little bit of, actually even a little bit of Fauche in there too, which is kind of, there's a little part.
The original grape of this area, right? That's the story of Maréchal Fauche goes back way
back
before the Becker
project. Yeah, it's true. I think the funny enough about that variety, in a small.
I actually like it. I know it's very polarizing, and I have friends here too that sort of roll their eyes and they say, well, it's not vinifera. And I think, like, well, I mean, have you had the Fauche from Quail's Gate? Have you had the Fauche from Mocajo before they took it out and planted Malbec? And I said, it's like there's something different about it.
It is actually a registered vinifera.
It is registered vinifera.
Yes. Yeah. But I think the end of the day, though, is that I think the reason is that, like with everything else that was probably made, is no one ever put attention into making probably well-crafted, not everyone, but most well-crafted varieties with Fauche in it, for example. And I think that's, it's a very interesting grape to work with, but because it's such a small amount, as a Tintador almost in it, it adds this kind of meatiness to the wine that's kind of cool.
Yeah, it's got a bit of a meaty nose. It's a very fragrant nose. Love that.
Yeah, so it's probably a less than 15% of it in there, right? But it's enough to kind of add this kind of super dynamic tension, because Fauche also has a little bit higher acidity, which is versus, like, say, Syrah, the Cab Sauv, or Merlot, which is a bit softer. What I like about that small piece of the Fauche is just adds this kind of spine to the wine. I've been doing that for a while now. I've been pleasantly surprised at how well it makes the wine last and continue to hold that spine. Certainly, I don't know if it would be the case if it was like all Fauche or 75% Fauche, for example, but I think the grape is a bit left of center for me to do a predominant Fauche type wine out of it. But it's an interesting, in the context of, like, back to that Portuguese inspiration, that's what made those wines magical. All of these different varieties were, I always say the field blend, again, if you look at the pragmatic reason why that happened, was because at the end of the day, it was their way of creating vintage consistency. Every year, certain varieties would shine over other varieties, but because you're harvesting them all from there and making a wine, the high and lows would be fairly shallow on that graph, versus if you're just picking a certain variety that would one year would do really well from that site, the next year does really poorly, you're high-low. Whereas if you're combining everything, but because if you have, like, say, 20 varieties, one year some varieties will do poorer than others, but because they're all being blended together, you get this consistency.
Sure. So it's in some ways that reminds me of a house style champagne, but they're doing it in barrel. They're creating their vintages, and then they're keeping all of these things separate, and then they're using them year over year for each vintage to create that house style, which is essentially doing the same thing.
Exactly. Right? Yeah, fantastic. I think, I think for me, it's interesting, and I have had some winemakers go like, "That's crazy," because I'll start some of these varieties will come in, say, middle end of September. I won't get some of the late varieties until the first week of November, and so I just continue adding to the vat.
Oh, like topping the juice.
So crushing
crushing and then
straight
just adding it right into the. Yeah.
So the original piece may have been there already a month fermenting, but I just keep adding and it's this fascinating. And I did the same thing with the whites.
Yeah.
So we'll The only difference with the whites versus the reds is that I'll add a step in there where I'll rack off the gross lees, and then say 24 hours, and then inject that wine into the ongoing ferment. And so at the end of the season, there may be a month and a half difference between when the first variety came in, the last variety was added. But you get this super cool this integration in the wine that's never quite the same when you blend after the fact. So in other words, singular components, after harvest, blend them in. These wines have literally incubated together, you know what I mean?
There's a guy years ago, I haven't seen in marketplace here from California that I recall, Hughes, who had these filled blends. 487 comes to mind. I think I bought many bottles of that, and it was just so unique compared to the muscular cab sauves and everything coming out of there. And I think he probably had exactly the same idea as you.
Yeah, for us, it's just kind of like, I think sometimes we tend to overthink things. I think that's been probably the biggest evolution of me as a winemaker is to, I don't really like the term low intervention, for example. I think that's a bit ridiculous in my opinion. I might annoy some people, but everything we do as a from a vineyard to winemaking, everything is intervention. What I plant, how I grow it, when I harvest it, how I water it, all of that's intervention. So I feel that that's not a very proper term. I think what is probably being meant is over-manipulated wine versus low intervention, because I intervene a lot. I'm very, 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 I'm very, from the vineyard to when it goes in the bottle, I am involved.
Hands-on, not hands-off. Yeah.
Because I always say wine's final destination wants to be vinegar. I'm trying to avoid that. So
exactly, yeah.
And so at the end of the day, what ends up happening is what I have done, though, is confidence over time has been able to just kind of go, hey, you know what, trust the process. And be less, micromanaging stuff in some ways, right? And I think that comes with just time. Knowing you're working for years and years with the same plot of dirt. That is sometimes a disadvantage with some of my colleagues, where the vineyard sourcing is always constantly changing to some degree. Those that have the luxury of working with the same vineyard over a span of time, you get this stable kind of understanding. It's these variables that you now kind of just are a lot more relaxed about.
So we're here in the restaurant, and you've created a pretty unique menu with Chef Abdul
Adame.
In the dishes are very Portuguese influenced. It's Portuguese Mex tapas is the term you guys use, I guess, for the restaurant. Bacalhau croquette and charales, which are these fried smelts, which I was thinking about that when I looked at the menu. It reminds me of hickory sticks when you're kid. Those little fried things. Yeah, those
smelts. They were a childhood favorite of mine growing up. We made those all the time when we were able to get those little smelts in. Interesting fact for the kitchen. It's kind of this weird, it was never the intention. I think a lot of people, when we start these kind of things, you want to be like fine dining or Michelin type or whatever the idea is. I think, it's sort of like with wine. I always say wine's a petri dish for arrogance. Same with foods. Same with food sometimes.
Well,
I think the food thing was we just kind of just made it farm, stuff not farm, but kind of family style stuff that he grew up with, I grew up with, that many people that didn't come from those cultures just weren't exposed to. And funny enough, I've had so many Portuguese come in and go like bolinhos de bacalhau, which is the the little croquettes that you're talking about. We can't see bolinhos de bacalhau because people can't pronounce it, so it's we've had to kind of make some creative decisions on the naming.
For sure. Yeah.
But it's just kind of become a thing, and in fact we're now the longest running winery chef collaboration in BC.
How, over a dozen years or something?
Yeah, right? I always bug my good friend Jeff down at Maradero. Our ownership hasn't changed, so for me it's Abul and I have been here since they started thinking about 6 months early. I love those guys, what they're doing down there. By the way, it's one of my favorite restaurants.
Where is that? Tin Horn Creek?
Tin Horn Winery. They do an amazing job over there, and Jeff is a legend down there. But we always kind of bug him a little bit because now we are definitely, since 2012, Chef Abul and I have been working together since then, which is usually unheard of, and we're only open for 6 months of the year. Typically, place for dinners can be booked a week in advance or more.
Yes.
Which is fascinating. I mean, it boggles him and I just kind of like, wow, we just never set out with that. Certainly when people come here, it's got this very kind of rustic, like if you were in Spain or in the Basque region or Portugal, it's kind of very rustic, outdoory, woodsy kind of.
That's the part for me when I think about listeners in a podcast. Like if you could sit here yourself with us in this moment, and we're looking over the vineyards. You've got these Adirondack chairs out there where people can take a little picnic or a glass of wine, and we're basically on a patio a level up from your crush pad and your crusher.
Hey, seeing my tanks and stuff. Yeah, the view is amazing. I mean, it's weird. Like we take it for granted, and certainly some of the things, like there's a lot of places I think with this, spend a lot of time in really fancy architecture and polish and all of this. But I think the magic of what works here, there isn't that polish in a sense. It's kind of very, I had a distinct vision in my mind. The home it was a home before. The initial core of the winery was one of the original picker shacks here from the turn of the century, 1909, somewhere in that range, hand built. And I always envisioned, even my own family, I said, look, when we build this place out, I want to portray literally my dad working at the sawmill, bringing wood home, scraps of wood, and every Friday or every day after work, a few scraps, and just slowly adding to the place in a very rustic way. It was wood that was just scavenged for free. And everything from the flooring to the wooding, I have some people come here and they feel it's kind of this peace comes over them because there's not this kind of like high-end fashion kind of driven, marble and very exotic materials. It's just kind of it's like we're home. That is what I wanted the place to kind of portray. I didn't know that eventually it would be kind of evolve into this. It just, my wife and I were sole owners, and we, out of necessity, that's how we built it, because those are our resources. And so I think it's worked.
It is worked. And it's lovely. Where else, would you want to be than a kind of a covered patio like this with a little bit of shade and some fans overlooking the vineyard on a gorgeous sunny summer afternoon in the Okanagan, on the upper bench.
Yeah, we're blessed, and I think the partnership between the working relationship between Chef Abul and myself, and funny enough, our story, he was one of the very first restaurants to carry my wine when I very first started, and that was back in 2006. I believe it was, and so it's been a long journey. I mean, usually you don't see people working together like that for that length of time, and I think even my team members here, we really pride ourselves in having team members that have been here for a fairly long time, and it's
a testament to your very personal family values.
Yeah, I think it's a team effort. I think certainly we have our interesting family dynamics in here at times, but I think there's always this kind of like underlying that, hey, we're all just trying to make it work. And it's a very challenging industry. I think for us, I always say that one of the distinguishing things that you might feel when you walk in here is that this winery is not a vanity project. This winery, we're sustenance farmers. All my growers that I work with, family members and other farm growers that I work with, they're all sustenance farmers. In other words, it's their only livelihood. It's not I had a dream, I wanted to do this or that. It was like, it is the means that they send their children to school, that they feed their family and pay their mortgages. It is their source of income. In most cases, their only source of income. And in here, you sense that. This is not like, I thought it was cool or something like that. Like this is my wife and I, our livelihood. And not saying that that's unique to our other colleagues in the industry, but I think in the ever-evolving wine world, you see more and more of these vanity projects come out that certainly are super cool. I really enjoy someone celebrating success and building some of the wineries that we've been able to see grow up around us here. I'm very jealous sometimes, actually, because I'd love to have some of that equipment. Even one of those tanks would probably pay for.
There's a lot of money up in these parts, and people are paying attention. And driving up on the bench road to get here today too, that I just nipped in very quickly to the new Evolve cellars there, and remarkable
it's fascinating
investment and fascinating kind of change for both time and Evolve. But that's just one other new thing going on right here.
Yeah, I think for us, certainly think it brings all sorts of different, people into the region. And eventually someone will stumble into our little place. I mean, we're kind of tucked into a side road here. Definitely wouldn't be a first destination place off the top of your head because we don't have that kind of marketing presence. But when people come in, it's just like, today we just had a new wine club member sign up, members at Predator Ridge. They're just like,
Good.
they're like, dude, like this is like, there's a sense of farm, of family, there's a sense of belonging that they feel from the staff and from what we're doing here. And I guess that's a bit of our magic sauce. I think at the end of the day, I think we just need to just tell your story. Hopefully they obviously enjoy the wines. This is what we're here to make. But I think what's in the bottle is sometimes tertiary, sometimes to the overall the soul of the place. And I think that's something that I've had a good friend of mine, industry, a person in the actually media side of things said to me one day, said, yeah, you know what, it's just, there's a sense of soul. I think to me that's probably the best compliment, other than my wines won a bunch of awards or medals or any of that kind of stuff. That to me means more because it's the engine that drives us and motivates us every day.
Yeah.
And to be recognized for that is more meaningful than getting accolades. I'm not saying I don't like getting accolades or it's not important, but ultimately at the end of the day, I would remember that. I remember that more at evening.
Goes beyond that for sure, yeah. So we're kind of in the middle of Veraison.
Yep.
Harvest is coming very soon. What are your thoughts and anticipations for this 2025 vintage year?
I always try to refrain from making any kind of predictions.
That's wise.
I have so many colleagues that this is the vintage of the century or this, make all sorts of.
Before you bring in the berries,
I'm
probably
just
not a good idea. But
I until it's in a tank. But that being said, I think the year it's going to showcase those who are really good growers. That may be actually almost sometimes cliche, because it should always show really good growers. Mm-hmm. There's been some interesting things with some of the vineyards. Some of the vineyards have been overcropping or hanging a lot of weight. I'm not saying they're going to keep the fruit. There's been a lot of variability, and what I do like in a year like this year, where it's not super hot.
Are you talking about your own vineyards specifically, like this?
My own vineyard, but I'm talking about as an observation of the industry around me, the vineyards around me as well, and so including my own. But because it hasn't been extreme heat or extreme cold or really all that rainy, though some people got caught back-footed a little bit with some of the rain and moisture and not being prepared to deal with some of their pest management practices. These are the kind of years like 2019 that had the potential to show some fantastic stars, given the right circumstances to show itself. And the reason I say that is because you're not dealing with a lot of heat, you're not dealing with some kind of tons of adverse, and a little bit of some of the vines growing a little bit. So what happens physiologically to a plant is that when you have these winter kills, there's kind of this natural reaction for the plant to kick things into high gear, actually overcompensate for not having fruit the year before. And so I haven't been as quick to drop a lot of fruit as some of my colleagues have been, because one of the things is when you have years like this where the fruit wants to produce sugar, mm-hmm. they've been ripening actually quicker, even given the conditions. It hasn't been super hot year, because there's so much energy there, pent up energy that wasn't being used last year. And having a little bit of extra crop allows me to retain and balance that out with some acidity. Mm-hmm. And so I kind of buck the trends on that kind of stuff. Like, to me, I'm not making it, it's not by a numbers thing. It's more of a, not to be kind of whatever, but it's sort of almost like a feeling.
It's intuitive.
Yeah, I'm just looking at where, like, I could drop this. This looks a bit, like Viognier, for example, this year. Notoriously drops out of acid, can really become flabby quite quickly. Yeah. If I would have dropped fruit in our Viognier right over here next door, the potential for that would have been, we're dealing now with a situation where that fruit was going to have lots of alcohol, lots of sugar, mm-hmm. but really, unless you were absolutely timed to just right, this way I can let it hang, get more phenolic ripeness, have a bit more depth, still preserve the acidity, because I'm leaving that fruit on a little bit more than typically would be done by some of my other counterparts. It's that kind of intuition. It's not always the case, but that's an example of where this harvest will really bring out, I think, those around that understand that. Where are they going to find the balance? Instead of just making a textbook call, using their intuition, like you said, to kind of make that. And I think that's where this year will be shining. So as a consumer, I'd be keeping an eye on some of the, I don't think it's going to happen for everyone, unfortunately. But there's, and again, like I said, until it's in my tank or in my barrel, who knows? Maybe I'm out to lunch. I think hopefully not. But I've one thing about this industry has always taught me that you have to be humble. You have to be willing to kind of be able to pivot, because the time, the day you think you know it is the day when shit hits the fan. And I'm like, and for me, I've learned that lesson the hard way. So I'm being reserved a bit. I think it's a clean year, fantastic moderate temperature, no extremes.
Hopefully that carries through September.
September.
When are you gonna, when you're thinking of bringing in the first grapes then?
Probably the next couple of weeks.
Yeah. Are you all set down in the brush pad?
No.
No.
I'm not even remotely ready yet. So it's it's part of being a vigneron and being a small business owner. It's there's so many different hats to wear that you're always constantly playing catch up. I think in the next week we'll be pretty much caught up, but we got bottling to do, we got this to do and that to do, and I should have been bottled a month or two ago, but our glass is tied up in a ship somewhere, and we're just like, ugh. Yeah. So it's a small business juggle that we all. I'm
sure you have some good help and seller hands, and people in the area I know kind of rally in this moment, and you team up and you get it done.
Yeah, there's been amazing colleagues in our neighborhood. I can't say enough. Like the team over at Poplar Grove have been amazing, not just to myself, to others in the industry.
The Hollises are.
The haulers are fantastic. I think that we it's great to see that. I think if anything I would like to see the industry do is as we mature and become more self-confident, is the magic is being able to find, reaching across and working together to collectively win. And I think that it's happening far more today than it did a generation ago. And I think that's probably one of the things I'm super excited to see the future of BC wine.
It's kind of that teamwork makes the dream work mantra right there, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, for the whole industry. Well, we've been at this, Richard, for about an hour now. Yeah. We've covered a lot of ground. I think it would be great to come back and get in the cellar and get into the vineyards, but as you state, you got lots of work on deck and things to prepare for. I know it's the restaurant's closed today, but you'll be back in business tomorrow, back here, and I'm sure there'll still be loads of people coming in before Labor Day weekend to get those last moments in, and tastings and visits.
Yeah, we're super, we're super grateful for the support BC and Canadian consumers have given to our wines. I'm a big advocate of BC and supporting, even our friends in Niagara, Canadian wines. Mm-hmm. I would encourage your customers to keep exploring. There's some just amazing wines across the country, and to open up those borders, because it's I'm constantly being amazed at the quality of stuff I'm seeing from across the country, not just here in my own neighborhood, mm-hmm. And the stories like mine that are waiting to be told. And I think for so many consumers, if you're in Canada, reach out, go travel here, or travel to the island, Vancouver Island, or the Fraser Valley, try wineries, or Niagara, or Prince Edward County, or back east in Nova Scotia. So many cool little stories and wines that each have their own thing, and it's right here in our own backyard.
Yeah, that's true. I've yet to get across two other provinces. I was in Niagara many years ago, but and the same thing, in market here we don't see Nova Scotia wines at all, and I've had a few bangers actually at some tastings in the past. I know they grow Ortega over there predominantly for white, and it's delicious.
I'm telling you, I think it's one of the biggest shames that I feel is such a, if I leave this with your listeners, I think the in this current environment of how alcohol is distributed across the country, we don't get to see the best parts. I've been very fortunate and been honored to be guest speaking now for a number of years, 2 or 3 years now in Niagara, working with my colleagues in Niagara, and they come out here to do panels and taste absolutely mind-blowing wines like Cab Franc, Cab Sauv. You would never think about that. You wouldn't think of it from Niagara. Mm-hmm. Pinot Noir, Chardonnays are just mind-blowingly good.
Riesling too. Yeah.
Rieslings, and it's just been like, why don't we see these wines? Why aren't our consumers seeing these wines? And fantastic personalities, legends like Brian Schmidt and his family at Vineland, and Lou and his family over at Pondview, and so many others that are just like so many fascinating, dynamic individuals that have passion at a whole other level as well, and making just amazingly world-class wines. I'm just like, why don't we see those? Like, why didn't I ever taste it? Like, I remember 3 years ago going to Niagara, and I had a preconceived notion of what I was going to be tasting, and I was just already just negative. I was humbled. It was one of the few times where I was left speechless in a couple of tastings, where I walked out of the room I was like, that was not expected. And I would say that, for your consumer or your listener that only believes you can make great Cab Sauv in California or anything like that no, man. Yeah. You have to look for it and do that. But that journey of discovery is half the fun.
Yeah, I will do my bit to get the word out and tell people to enjoy these stories and enjoy these wines and get out there and explore, as Canadian wine industry is vast. It's not just here in British Columbia. So that said, for listeners, where can they find your wines aside from joining the wine club? I'm going to put all the links in the description box, of course. But
yeah, I mean, there's certainly a small selection of stores. Boutique stores throughout the province that carry everything wine, and some at Save-On, for example, and smaller retailers. Most of our wines are in wine lists at restaurants. So the majority of our wines that most of our consumers find, because we don't have a huge production, obviously, that's where I'd say probably 70% of our outside wines are in restaurant lists.
Great.
And so, but they can always look at our website. We are going to have an updated list of where their local stores they can find our wines. And they can always reach out to myself or my...
Our website is
DeSilvaVineyards.com.
DeSilvaVineyards.com.
Correct, yeah.
Okay.
And as for Twylla, I'm notoriously bad at getting to my emails. But my wife, Twylla, my much better half, she's on it, and she would love to help guide you if you have any questions.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Richard. You've been on the docket for so long, and finally to get up here to the winery and sit with you on the patio here at the restaurant and have this moment has been a sincere pleasure. So
likewise.
Very, very much appreciated, and the wines are delicious too. Cheers to you.
Cheers.
And thank you. You've been listening to The Barrel Room, and I'm Wine Guy Ty. If you like this content, remember to heart this episode. It really does help the algorithm, and you can also subscribe to this podcast for the low, low price of free, so you don't miss another future drop. Fun fact, if you hit the share button and copy link, many more humans can join us here as I raise my glass to you. Find The Barrel Room on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google, iHeartRadio, and nearly anywhere else you get this type of content. As always, I appreciate you tuning in today. If you or someone interesting from the world of wine would like to be considered for an interview live in the Barrel Room, please reach out through your app or direct message me on IG at WineGuyTy. Remember, the best wines are those shared with friends. Let's share my next drop together. Cheers, santé, and salut.